Hello and welcome to INE's CCI Service Provider version 5 learning path. My name is Rohit Pardasani and I would be your instructor throughout this course. Now in this course, we will look at the introduction to CCI Service Provider version 5. We will also look at the blueprint changes from version 4.1 to 5.0. We will look at the hardware resources required or what equipments are added or removed from the new blueprint, basically from the perspective of the new blueprint. We will also look at what are the recommended resources for studying for this new blueprint and also the exam format changes. So here is the agenda of this course where we will look at the blueprint changes from version 4.1 to 5.0. We will also look at the 5.0 exam format changes, what basically changed in the format of the exam from version 4.1 to 5.0. We will also look at the hardware specification and finally the list of recommended resources that you should gather or study to pass the CCI Service Provider Lab exam. Now here is the link where Cisco has provided us with the basic differences, basically the blueprint differences between version 4.1, which is the current version right now, and the new version which is coming up in February 2020. So let's have a quick look at these blueprint changes. So if I look at the service provider version 4.1 to 5.0, the basic differences is basically in the domain. What Cisco did with the new version, they basically organized all the concepts or all the topics in respective domains. So if you look at 4.1, which is on the left side, I have 6 domains, which is core, routing, service provider architecture and services. We have access and aggregation, high availability and fast convergence. We have service provider security, operations and management. And lastly was evolving technology. The evolving technology was only in the written exam, not in the lab. So if you look at from a lab exam perspective, it had 5 domains. 1.0, which was core routing, all the way up to services, which was security, management and operations. If you look at the right side, I have the new version, which is version 5.0. It has 6 domains now. So we have core routing, we have architecture and services, we have access connectivity, we have high availability and fast convergence, we have security, and the new one, which is going to be in the new blueprint, is going to be assurance and automation. All right, so if you look at the previous version, the core routing was basically 30% of your lab exam versus now the core routing is going to be 25%. Basically in the core routing is going to be your ISIS, IGP mainly, ISIS and OSPF, which is going to be the core of the service provider environment. The domain 2, which was service provider architecture and services, this was earlier 22% and now this is 25%. Access and aggregation, where we have the PE and CE communication happening, that what routing protocol is running between them, that was basically 21% earlier and now that's going to be 10%. High availability and fast convergence was 15% earlier, which is now 10%. Security was 12% and here we still have 10%. And then the new blueprint has assurance and automation, which is a pretty major chunk, which is 20% of your lab exam. So let's quickly view the core differences in each of these domains between the version 4.1 and 5.0. Basically review the changes that is now in the new blueprint that you need to study. Additionally, basically the new topics that you need to study to prepare for the new blueprint. So let's expand core routing and look at the differences between 4.1 and 5.0. If you look at the major section is pretty much the same, where we have ISIS and OSPF, we have BGP, we have MPLS, basic MPLS, MPLS traffic engineering, multicast and QoS. If you look at the new blueprint, it is still the same. We have ISIS, OSPF version 2 and version 3, which basically means that it's going to be IPv4 and IPv6. We have BGP. However, in BGP, there's one new topic which is basically going to be majorly focused on, which is going to be segment routing or BGP segments or label unicast and link state. This was basically not a major focus in 4.1, but in the new blueprint, it is going to be a major focus in your lab exam. As far as the multicast is concerned, the multicast is pretty similar to what it was earlier, except for the new changes that we have, where we have tree SID and we have MLDP was in fact already there earlier, but now we have RSVPTE, which now need to be focused on. The rest of the topics are basically pretty much the same from the previous blueprint, where you still need to know about your PIM, sparse mode, or source-specific multicast, which is going to be in the new blueprint also, which is basically carried forward from the previous blueprint. MPLS is pretty much the same, and MPLS traffic engineering is also mostly the same, with just two new topics added, which was using the flexible algorithm and optimizing MPLS DE, basically scaling and performance. So if you look at the core differences between the earlier blueprint and the new blueprint, 90% of it is still the same, where the major focus would be on ISIS, OSPF, BGP, and segment routing. Let's now expand the second domain, which is going to be service provider and architectural services. Let's go back to version 5. Here, if you look at the core differences, in the old blueprint, we had basic concepts, which was mainly for the written exam, but here we learn about the carrier Ethernet, L3 VPNs, overlay VPNs, and internet service, where here we have pretty similar to the older blueprint. We still have the internet service, we still have L3 VPN, we still have carrier Ethernet, and what's basically added is virtualized infrastructure is basically added, where we would look at network function virtualization, maybe designing it or optimizing it from perspective of a large-scale infrastructure. Besides that, QoS, which was earlier in core routing, has now moved to architectures and services, where we now have QoS between the routers, which could be on the PE routers, between the P and the PE, or it could be on XR routers as well. So if you look at from perspective of this domain, the major change was that QoS was added here, virtualized infrastructure was added, and again, multi-domain segment routing was basically added in designing large-scale MPLS architecture. Moving ahead to domain number 3, which is access and aggregation. Here, the change was basically in the older blueprint, we had the PE-CE connectivity, which could be OSPF, RIP, RIP-NG, EIGRP, ISIS, or even BGP. Here, if you look at the changes in the access connectivity, we only have the PE-CE protocol being OSPF, ISIS, and BGP. Basically, RIP, RIP-NG, and EIGRP was basically removed from the new blueprint. So if I look at domain number 4, which is high availability and fast convergence, here it's pretty similar to what it was earlier. We still have IGP convergence using OSPF or ISIS, LDP convergence, BGP convergence, or BFD or fast reroutes. All that is pretty similar to what it was earlier. There's absolutely no changes in domain number 4. Now, domain 5 is pretty similar to the older blueprint. We still have control plane security, management plane security, and infrastructure security, which is still there in the new blueprint. So, pretty similar to the older blueprint, where no changes happened between the two domains of security. However, the major change came in was in domain number 6. Now, as far as domain 6 is concerned, which is assurance and automation, this was the major change in the new blueprint. This earlier wasn't there in the older blueprint, where we have now network assurance, where they could ask you syslogs or SNMP, NetFloor, or segment routing, or in fact segment routing data plane monitoring, and even MPLS performance monitoring. The second module of this assurance and automation would be network automation, where you would need to learn about designing, deploying, and optimizing NSO service packages like Yang or template-based or Python-based or even netconf or NSO products, which is northbound integration or southbound configuration. Here you would need to learn about designing NFV orchestration using NFVO and ESC as per the ETSI model, which is a framework for your NFVI architecture. Lastly, you would also have to study, deploy, and optimize Ansible playbooks, which is what is going to be heavily tested on in the new blueprint. So in short, the major changes in the CCIE version 5 blueprint was in the core routing, where we had segment routing for OSPF and ISIs, BGP segment, multicast SID, we had LDP and segment routing interworking, segment routing traffic engineering, flexible algorithm, and optimize MPLS-TE. The topics that were removed from the core routing was basically QoS. QoS was not entirely removed, but basically moved to architecture and services. So in the second domain, here is the list of changes. We had the list of topics that were basically added was designing network function virtualization infrastructure, cloud scale network infrastructure, Cisco infrastructure as a service, network slicing, Rosen MVPN, next generation MVPN, MPLS-TE QoS, classification and marking, and congestion management and avoidance. These were the list of topics that were basically added in the second domain, which was architectures and services. In the third domain, which was access connectivity, there was absolutely no changes. The only change was that the PECE routing protocol, which was EIGRP, was basically removed. So you don't have EIGRP or RIP-NG as the PECE routing protocol. The only routing protocol that you can expect in the new blueprint would be either OSPF or ISIs or BGP. In domain number 4, we had absolutely no changes. Domain number 4 was exactly the same, absolutely no changes in domain 4. In domain 5, which was security, again, no changes in the security. The only change that happened was basically some of the topics from the security domain from the older blueprint was removed, like for example syslog, SNMP, RMON, NetFlow, IPFix, IPSLA, or MPLS OAM or Ethernet OAMs. They were basically removed, not entirely from the blueprint, but they were moved from section 5, which was your security, to network assurance. So if you look at the blueprint changes for network assurance, all those topics which were there in 4.1 was basically moved to network assurance, where we still have syslog, SNMP, RMON, your NetFlow and IPFix. We have MPLS OAM and Ethernet OAMs. The only two topics which were basically added in this network assurance was segment routing data plane monitoring and segment routing OAM. The last part was network automation. This was 100% new, where you would be basically tested for design, deploy, and optimize NSO service packages, like for example Yang or netconf, REST APIs. We also have design NFV orchestration and NFVI architectures. We have deploy and optimize Ansible scripts. So you would definitely be presented with some kind of automation for, or maybe you have to use the Ansible scripts, which is basically an agentless deployment. Then we have the model-driven telemetry, which is also a new topic in this blueprint. I hope this video was informative to you, and thank you for watching.